There is a sound that exists only in the deepest parts of the great sand sea, a sound that is not a sound at all, but rather the heavy, physical presence of absolute stillness. It is a low, rhythmic hum of the wind as it brushes against the crests of dunes that rise 300 feet into the air, a sound so ancient and so constant that after a few hours the mind begins to interpret it as silence. This is the heart of the Eastern Sahara, a vast and unforgiving expanse of 72,000 square kilometers, stretching between the borders of modern Egypt and Libya. Here, the world is reduced to its most primal elements, the pale, bleached blue of a cloudless sky and the endless, shifting waves of golden quartz sand. There are no birds here to break the quiet, no insects to buzz in the dry heat, and no water for hundreds of miles in any direction. It is a landscape that feels as though it has been frozen in time, yet it is a place of constant microscopic motion, where every grain of sand is a traveller, and every dune is a slow-moving mountain. As you walk across the inter-dune corridors, the flat, gravelly plains that lie between the towering sand ridges, the ground beneath your feet feels impossibly old. This is a place of deep time, a concept in geology and archaeology that refers to the vast, almost incomprehensible scales of the Earth's history, reaching back long before the first human thought was ever whispered into the air. In these quiet corridors, the wind occasionally peels back the top layer of the desert to reveal something unexpected. Amidst the dark desert pavement and the dull brown pebbles, a flash of light catches the eye. It is not the shimmer of a mirage or the glint of common quartz. It is something far more ethereal. You lean down, your fingers brushing away the fine dust to reveal a fragment of glass. But it is not the glass we know from our windows or our bottles. This substance is translucent, glowing with a soft otherworldly yellow-green hue, like the color of a shallow tropical sea or a piece of frozen sunlight. When you hold this material up to the sun, it reveals a milky, swirling inner world filled with tiny bubbles and dark streaks of solidified mystery. This is Libyan Desert Glass, a substance so pure that it consists of nearly 98% silica. It is scattered across a specific desolate region of the Great Sand Sea, lying there as if it were discarded by a jeweler from another dimension. For decades, it was simply a curiosity of the deep desert, a secret known only to the nomadic tribes who occasionally traversed these wastes. But as the 20th century progressed, scientists and explorers began to realize that these beautiful, translucent shards were the wreckage of a cosmic event that occurred 29 million years ago, long before the rise of the Nile, long before the first pyramids were built, and long before the ancestors of humanity had even learned to stand upright. As you settle into your blankets and let the weight of the day drift away, you are joining us in a place where time has no meaning. Here at the Slumber Archives, we find comfort in the long shadows of the past, sharing new history narrations just like this one every single day to help you find your way to sleep. If you are enjoying this journey into the ancient sands, perhaps you might consider subscribing so you never miss our nightly explorations. A gentle like on the video also helps others find their way to our quiet corner of the world. For now, let us return to the silence of the great sand sea, where the mystery of the yellow glass waits to be unraveled. The isolation of this place is difficult to overstate. To stand in the center of the glass-strewn fields is to be as lonely as an astronaut on the surface of the moon. The nearest permanent well is days of difficult travel away, and the heat during the midday hours is a physical weight that demands stillness. This geographic seclusion is precisely why the glass remained a mystery for so long. It was not until the 1930s that Western explorers, led by the eccentric and daring Patrick Clayton, officially documented the site. They found themselves wandering through a natural gallery of gemstones, millions of pieces of glass ranging from the size of a pebble to massive boulders weighing several kilograms. It was as if a great vessel made of emerald and gold had shattered over the desert, its debris scattered across the landscape by a force beyond human comprehension. The existence of this glass poses a fundamental challenge to our understanding of the Earth's natural processes. In the traditional study of stratigraphy, the branch of geology concerned with the order and relative position of strata and their relationship to the geological timescale, we look for slow, gradual changes. We look for the steady accumulation of silt in a riverbed or the slow cooling of volcanic lava. But the Libyan Desert Glass does not fit into this slow narrative. To create glass of this purity, you need heat, intense, terrifying heat. You need temperatures exceeding 1600 degrees Celsius, a heat so fierce that it can turn solid rock into liquid in an instant. Yet there are no volcanoes in the Great Sand Sea. There are no ancient lava flows, no tectonic rifts that could have birthed such a fire. The desert floor shows no signs of the subterranean violence that usually accompanies such geological transformations. And so, we are left to look upward, toward the stars. The silence of the desert today masks a moment of unimaginable violence that occurred in the late Oligocene epoch. As the years passed and the wind continued to sculpt the dunes, the mystery only deepened. If the heat didn't come from below, it must have come from above. We begin to imagine a silent morning 29 million years ago. The landscape then was not a desert, but a lush green savanna, perhaps dotted with shallow lakes and teeming with prehistoric life. The ancestors of modern elephants and primates would have moved through the tall grasses, unaware that the sky was about to open. Deep time has a way of hiding its scars. Over millions of years, the earth heals itself, covering the wounds of cosmic impacts with layers of sediment and shifting sands. But the glass remains. It is a chemical ghost, a witness to a weapon of the heavens that we are only just beginning to understand. When scientists first began to analyze the chemical composition of the shards, they found something startling. Within the translucent green matrix were microscopic droplets of iridium and osmium, elements that are incredibly rare in the Earth's crust, but are found in high concentrations in meteorites. The evidence began to point toward a cosmic visitor, a stony traveler from the asteroid belt that found its way into our atmosphere. However, the mystery does not end with a simple impact. Usually when a large meteorite strikes the Earth, it leaves a crater, a vast circular depression in the ground, often surrounded by shocked quartz and other signs of a massive collision. Yet, in the Great Sand Sea, there is no crater. There is no gaping hole in the earth to account for the millions of tons of glass scattered across the surface. This absence of a crater led researchers to propose a theory that is perhaps even more frightening than a direct hit. They began to speak of an airburst. A moment when a massive bolide, perhaps 80 meters wide, enters the atmosphere at such a high velocity that the friction of the air causes it to explode before it ever touches the ground. Imagine a fireball several times hotter than the surface of the sun, detonating in the sky with the force of 1,000 atomic bombs. The thermal radiation would have screamed down toward the earth in a wave of invisible fire, melting the very surface of the Sahara into a lake of liquid glass in a matter of seconds. This was the cosmic weapon ground into jewelry by the ancients, though they could never have known the true nature of its birth. Thousands of years ago, a different kind of traveler walked these sands. The Neolithic people of the Sahara, living in a time when the desert was experiencing a brief period of rainfall and greenery, found these yellow stones. To them, the glass was a gift from the spirits or the gods. They recognized its beauty and its utility. Because it was glass, it could be knapped, broken in a controlled way to create incredibly sharp edges. Archaeologists have found Neolithic tools, scrapers, and arrowheads made from this 29-million-year-old cosmic glass, scattered near ancient hearths and dried-up lake beds. As the centuries passed, the knowledge of the glass travelled. It moved along the early trade routes, passing from hand to hand, tribe to tribe, until it eventually reached the workshops of the royal jewellers in the Nile Valley. There, it would be carved into the shape of a scarab, the symbol of rebirth and the sun god Ra, and placed on the chest of a young king named Tutankhamun. The king would go to his grave wearing a piece of the stars, a fragment of a fire that had consumed the desert long before his civilization was even a dream. The wind continues to blow across the great sand sea, and the glass continues to wait. Each piece is a tiny window into a moment of absolute chaos, preserved in a state of tranquil beauty. As we lie here in the safety of the present, we can almost feel the heat of that ancient sun and the profound, heavy silence that followed the fire. The desert keeps its secrets well, buried beneath the dunes, waiting for the wind to reveal them once more. We are but brief visitors in this landscape of deep time, listening to the whispers of a world that was, and the cosmic forces that shaped the very ground beneath our feet. The journey across the sand has only just begun, and the mysteries of the green glass are far deeper than they first appear. For now, let the silence of the Sahara be your guide as we drift further into the history of the stars and the sand. The sound of a rubber tire crunching against a stray fragment of stone is often the only thing that breaks the rhythmic drone of an engine in the great sand sea. In the December of 1932, a man named Patrick Clayton was navigating this desolate expanse, a surveyor for the Egyptian Geological Survey, whose eyes were trained to find the anomalies in the shifting dunes. He was miles from the nearest well, further still from the comfort of a paved road, when the light caught something unusual, a flicker of translucent green amidst the endless reds and ochres of the desert floor. When he stepped out of his vehicle, he found himself standing upon a carpet of glass scattered across the sand as if a celestial jeweller had spilled a bag of emeralds across the wasteland. These were not the jagged, dark shards of volcanic rock, nor the frosted debris of a modern ruin. They were smooth, wind-sculpted pieces of a material that felt impossibly ancient, glowing with a soft, yellowish-green hue that seemed to hold the very essence of the sun within its core. The discovery sent a ripple of quiet curiosity through the scientific circles of the early 20th century. It was a geological enigma that defied easy categorization, a puzzle piece that didn't seem to fit the known history of the African continent. Geologists began to wonder how such a vast quantity of glass, thousands of tons of it, could be resting in one of the most remote places on Earth, far from any known volcano or industrial center. As the years passed and samples were brought back to the laboratories of London and Cairo, the mystery only deepened. Researchers found themselves staring at a substance that was, for all intents and purposes, a chemical anomaly. This glass was nearly 98% pure silica. To put that into perspective, most glass we encounter in our daily lives is a mixture of various minerals, but this Saharan glass was almost entirely composed of melted quartz, a purity that requires temperatures far beyond what a typical forest fire or even a volcanic eruption could provide. When we look at other natural glasses, we see the fingerprints of Earth's internal heat, or the sudden jagged energy of a lightning strike. There is obsidian, the dark, volcanic glass born from the cooling of lava, which carries a deep, opaque blackness and a sharp, brittle edge. And then there are fulgurites, those delicate hollow tubes formed when lightning strikes sandy soil, fusing the grains into a fragile record of a momentary flash. But the Libyan Desert Glass is different. It lacks the impurities of obsidian and the hollow, branching structure of the fulgurite. It exists in massive solid chunks, some weighing several pounds, possessing a clarity and a color that suggests a process of melting so intense and so uniform that it transcends the standard geological toolkit. It is as if the desert itself was momentarily turned into a furnace, a crucible of unimaginable heat that lasted just long enough to liquefy the very ground before freezing it back into a solid state. And so, the search for a source began, a search for the smoking gun that would explain such a monumental transformation of the landscape. In the traditional understanding of geology, such massive deposits of glass are usually the calling cards of a meteorite impact. When a giant rock from space slams into the Earth's crust, the kinetic energy is converted into heat so profound that it vaporizes rock and sends sprays of molten glass flying for miles. These are known as tektites. However, as surveyors and later satellite imagery scoured the region surrounding Patrick Clayton's discovery, they encountered a frustrating silence. There was no visible impact crater. There was no yawning maw in the earth, no ring of uplifted rock, no shattered stratigraphy, which is the study of rock layers that tells us the chronological story of the ground. In the immediate vicinity of the glass, the desert floor remained undisturbed, a flat and undulating sea of sand that offered no easy answers. This absence of a crater created a void in the narrative, a missing chapter that led some to whisper of more exotic origins. If there was no impact, how could the sand have reached the 2,000 degrees Celsius required to melt silica into such a pure form? The silence of the desert seemed to guard this secret closely, forcing scientists to look beyond the terrestrial and toward the cold, dark reaches of the cosmos. They began to contemplate the possibility of an aerial burst, a visitor from space that never actually touched the ground, but instead detonated in the atmosphere with the force of 1,000 suns. It is a haunting thought. A phantom strike that leaves no scar upon the earth, only a field of beautiful green glass as a reminder of a moment when the sky turned into a weapon. As we dwell on this, we must consider the sheer scale of time involved. The glass is estimated to be roughly 29 million years old, a span of time so vast that human history is but a heartbeat in comparison. During that epoch, the Sahara was not the parched, golden void we know today. It was a different world entirely, and yet this event, this sudden flash of cosmic heat, left a mark that has endured through ice ages, the shifting of tectonic plates and the rise and fall of countless species. The glass remains, a translucent witness to a day when the laws of the desert were briefly suspended. Meanwhile, the chemical analysis continued to yield strange results. Within some of the darker streaks of the glass, researchers found traces of rare earth elements, iridium and osmium, minerals that are scarce in the Earth's crust but abundant in meteorites. It was a whisper from the stars, caught in a cage of silica. These tiny inclusions suggested that while a crater might be missing, the touch of the extraterrestrial was undeniably present. It is as if the cosmic traveller had dissolved into the glass itself, leaving behind a signature that could only be read millions of years later by a species that hadn't even begun to evolve when the fire fell. The mystery of the missing crater remains one of the great lingering questions of Saharan geology. In most places on our planet, time heals all wounds. Erosion from wind and water smooths over the jagged edges of a crater, and sediment fills the depths until the land is level once more. Perhaps the crater is there, buried deep beneath the shifting dunes of the great sand sea, hidden from our sight by hundreds of feet of sand that move like a slow golden river. Or perhaps the event was so unique that our current models of impact physics are simply incomplete. We are left to wander the dunes with Patrick Clayton's ghost, picking up these fragments of frozen light and wondering what kind of power could turn a landscape into jewelry. The glass feels cool to the touch now, polished by the relentless winds of the Sahara into shapes that are pleasing to the hand. It is difficult to reconcile this tactile beauty with the violence of its birth. To hold a piece of Libyan desert glass is to hold a fragment of a catastrophe, a piece of a day that should have been forgotten, but was instead preserved in silica. As the sun sets over the dunes, casting long purple shadows that stretch toward the horizon, the glass seems to glow with a pale inner light. It is a reminder that the earth is not a closed system, that we are constantly being touched by the vastness of the space beyond our atmosphere, and that sometimes that touch leaves a lasting impression. The journey into the heart of this enigma takes us deeper than just the chemical composition or the search for a crater. It leads us to the very dawn of human curiosity, to a time when our ancestors first wandered into these sands and found these same green stones. They too must have felt the weight of the unknown as they turned the glass over in their hands, marveling at its clarity in a world of dust. They didn't have the words for silica or iridium, but they recognized that these stones were special, that they were gifts from a realm they could not see. And so the story of the glass becomes a story of us, of our enduring need to understand the forces that shape our world, and the patient mystery of the stars that watch over us from the deep velvet blackness of the night sky. 29 million years ago, the silence of the great sand sea was not yet the silence of a desert, but the patience of a world waiting for its definitive moment. High above the swirling currents of the upper atmosphere, far beyond the reach of the most distant mountain peaks, a wanderer from the cold, dark reaches of the asteroid belt began its final descent. It was a fragment of a larger story, a jagged piece of cosmic debris composed of iron, stone, and frozen memory, traveling at speeds that defy our modern understanding of movement. To the human mind, 30,000 miles per hour is a number on a page, but in the realm of physics, it is a reservoir of kinetic energy so vast it could power a civilization for 1,000 years, all compressed into a single hurtling object. As this celestial traveller touched the first thin veils of our atmosphere, the friction began to transform it. The air, which we perceive as a soft and yielding medium, becomes as dense as a brick wall when struck at such velocities. The traveller did not simply fall, it collided with the very fabric of the sky. The friction generated a heat that rivaled the surface of the sun, turning the leading edge of the bolide into a white-hot plasma. Imagine a star, small and furious, tearing a jagged wound through the blue. As it plummeted toward the earth, the pressure built up ahead of it, a wall of compressed air that shrieked with the sound of a world being torn apart. Yet for all its fury, this was not to be a traditional impact. There would be no gargantuan crater left behind, like the scars we see on the moon or the deep circular tomb of the dinosaurs in the Yucatan. Instead, the physics of this event suggests something much more ethereal and perhaps more terrifying. Before the object could strike the solid ground, the immense pressure of the atmosphere proved too much for its internal structure. It reached a critical point, a threshold, where the force pushing against it exceeded the strength of the rock and metal itself. In a fraction of a heartbeat, the bolide did not hit the earth. It became the air. It disintegrated in a low-altitude airburst, a thermal explosion of such magnitude that it defies the scale of any weapon ever conceived by human hands. This was a cosmic weapon of pure light and heat, unleashed just miles above the desert floor. When the airburst occurred, it released a pulse of thermal radiation that rippled outward in every direction, traveling at the speed of light. The sands below, which had sat undisturbed for eons, were suddenly bathed in a temperature exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. In that moment, the distinction between the sky and the earth vanished. The atmosphere became a furnace, and the very ground began to weep. The sand did not simply get hot. It underwent a phase transition, a radical shift from solid to liquid in a matter of seconds. Across hundreds of square miles, the dunes melted like wax near a flame. The silica, the primary component of the desert sand, reached its boiling point and flowed together in glowing, incandescent rivers. This is the birth of the glass, a moment where the heavens reached down and touched the earth with such intensity that the landscape was fundamentally rewritten. As the heat began to dissipate and the shock wave rolled across the horizon, these pools of liquid sand began to cool. Because the cooling happened so rapidly, the molecules did not have time to arrange themselves back into the rigid, repeating patterns of crystals. Instead, they froze in a state of beautiful, chaotic transparency. We look at these fragments today and see a peaceful, translucent green, but their origin was a cacophony of fire and pressure. It is a reminder of how thin the veil is between the stability of our daily lives and the immense, indifferent forces of the cosmos. Scientists who study these events often look for the fingerprints of the stars, rare elements like iridium or osmium that are common in meteorites but rare on our planet's surface. In the Saharan glass, these fingerprints are present, whispered in the chemical composition of the stones, confirming that what we hold in our hands is indeed the byproduct of a celestial visitor. But beyond the chemistry and the physics lies a deeper mystery, the mystery of time. 29 million years is a span so large that it swallows the entirety of human history like a single grain of sand in the dunes. As the centuries turned into millennia and the millennia into millions of years, the glass lay buried and then revealed, shifted by the winds and the slow, grinding movements of the earth's crust. It waited in the silence, a testament to a day when the sky fell. We must wonder about the scale of such an event. If a similar airburst were to occur over a modern city, there would be nothing left but a lake of glass where the skyscrapers once stood. It is a humbling thought, one that invites us to look up at the night sky, not just with wonder, but with a quiet, respectful fear. The desert hides many things, but the glass is perhaps its most honest secret, a physical manifestation of a moment when the cosmic and the terrestrial became one. The journey of that Bolide, from the cold reaches of space to the searing heat of the Libyan Desert, is a journey of transformation. It reminds us that nothing is permanent, that even the most solid ground can be turned to liquid by a visitor from the stars. And as we continue to sift through the sands of the great sand sea, we find ourselves looking for more than just stones. We are looking for our place in a universe that is far older, far more violent, and far more beautiful than we can ever truly comprehend. The glass remains, cool to the touch now, smooth and inviting, a relic of a fire that burned before the first human ever walked the earth. It is a bridge across time, a piece of the infinite brought down to the finite, waiting for us to pick it up and wonder at the stories it could tell, if only it had a voice. As the winds continue to howl across the dunes, uncovering a fragment here and burying another there, the story of the cosmic weapon remains etched into the very chemistry of the desert. It is a story of energy and matter, of light and shadow, and of the long, slow cooling of a world that was once, for a brief and brilliant moment, a sea of molten glass. We are left to contemplate the sheer scale of the radiation that must have washed over the landscape, a light brighter than 1,000 suns, turning the night into day and the day into a vision of the end of the world. Yet life persisted, the earth healed, and the glass stayed, tucked away in the folds of the sand, a gemstone born of a catastrophe that no one was there to see. In the quiet of the night, when the desert air grows cold and the stars look down with their ancient, unblinking eyes, one can almost feel the echo of that ancient impact. It is a vibration in the soul, a recognition of our own fragility in the face of deep time. The glass is not just a geological curiosity, it is a talisman of the unknown, a reminder that the history of our world is written in fire as much as it is written in water, and so we continue to walk the dunes, guided by the faint green glow of a mystery that fell from the sky 29 million years ago, a gift from the void that we are only just beginning to understand. Imagine, for a moment, the absolute stillness of a world before the first human footfall ever marked the dust. In this silent era, 29 million years ago, the landscape that would one day become the great sand sea was not yet a desert in the way we recognize it today, but it was already a place of profound solitude. The air hung heavy and motionless over vast plains of quartz sand, millions upon millions of tiny translucent grains, each a miniature record of the deep time that had already passed. And then, the silence is not merely broken, but shattered by a force that defies the very laws of the terrestrial world. High above the atmosphere, a visitor from the cold reaches of the asteroid belt enters our orbit, moving with a velocity that turns the air itself into a wall of resistance. It does not need to strike the Earth to change it forever. Instead, it detonates in the mid-air, a thermal pulse of such staggering intensity that the sky seems to catch fire from horizon to horizon in an instant, a mere heartbeat in the span of geological epochs. The temperature at the surface of the desert screams upward, surpassing 2,000 degrees Celsius. This is a heat that the Earth rarely experiences on its surface. It is the temperature of the forge, the temperature of the stars, brought down to the silent dunes. As this invisible wave of heat washes over the landscape, the very ground begins to betray its solid nature. The ancient quartz sand, which had sat undisturbed for millions of years, does not simply burn, it transforms. Under the weight of those 2,000 degrees, the crystalline structure of the silica collapses. The grains lose their individuality, melting into a roiling, glowing liquid state that flows like honey across the scorched earth. For those few seconds, the desert floor is a sea of molten glass, a shimmering, incandescent lake reflecting a sky that has turned a blinding, terrifying white. But the violence of the cosmos is as brief as it is absolute. Almost as quickly as the heat arrived, it begins to dissipate into the surrounding atmosphere, and the molten silica is subjected to a process of rapid, unforgiving cooling. In the natural order of things, minerals prefer to cool slowly, allowing their atoms to march back into the orderly rows of a crystal lattice. But here, there is no time for order. The temperature drops so precipitously that the liquid quartz is frozen in its chaotic liquid-like state. It becomes a glass, an amorphous solid that holds within its translucent depths the memory of that sudden, violent transition. This is the moment of vitrification, the birth of the Libyan Desert Glass. Because it cooled so quickly, no crystals could form, leaving the material with a clarity and a peculiar, ethereal green-yellow hue that seems to glow with a light of its own. It is a substance born of a paradox, a liquid that forgot how to flow, a stone that has no internal structure. And yet, the heat was only the first messenger of the void. Following closely behind the thermal pulse came the physical reality of the event, the shock waves. These were not merely winds, but ripples in the very fabric of the atmosphere and the bedrock itself. As the air expanded from the heat of the explosion, it pushed outward with a pressure that would have flattened mountains. These waves rippled through the earth, vibrating the deep, crystalline basement of the continent, sending tremors through the crust that could be felt thousands of miles away. The sand that had not melted was tossed into the air in great churning clouds, while the newly formed glass was shattered and scattered across the landscape by the force of the blast, The atmosphere itself groaned under the weight of the energy release, a sound that would have been deafening had there been any ears to hear it. A low guttural roar of the universe asserting its power over the small blue planet. We often think of the Earth as a stable, unchanging entity, but in moments like these, we see its true nature as a canvas upon which the heavens occasionally choose to write in fire and glass. As the dust began to settle and the roar faded into a ringing silence, the landscape was forever altered. Where once there was only sand and scrub, there were now fragments of a celestial weapon, cooling in the shadows of the dunes. The shock waves had passed, leaving behind a scarred and vitrified earth, a silent witness to a cosmic encounter that lasted only seconds, but left a signature that would endure for 29 million years. The glass lay there, half buried, waiting for the slow march of the millennia to uncover it, waiting for a species not yet born to find it, and wonder at its origin. It is a sobering thought to realize how thin the veil is between the mundane and the miraculous. One moment, a quiet afternoon in a prehistoric waste. The next, a crucible of starfire that turns the very ground beneath our feet into something alien and beautiful. This rapid cooling, this freezing of chaos into a solid form, is perhaps the perfect metaphor for the history of our world. We see the finished product, the smooth, translucent shards, and we often forget the turbulence that created them. We forget the heat that reached 2,000 degrees, the liquid sand, and the shock waves that made the bedrock sing. In the heart of the great sand sea, the wind continues its tireless work, shifting the dunes and polishing the edges of these ancient travelers. As we hold a piece of this glass in our hands today, we are touching the exact moment when the sky fell, a moment when the laws of geology were briefly overruled by the laws of the cosmos. It is a cold, hard piece of evidence that the universe is not always a distant observer, but an active participant in the story of our world, capable of reaching down and transforming the very dust into jewels. The mystery of the vitrification process reminds us that much of what we consider to be the natural state of our planet is merely a period of calm between great storms. The quartz sand was natural, yes, but so was the fire that melted it. Both are part of the long, meandering narrative of the earth, and as the sun sets over the dunes today, casting long shadows across the areas where the glass still hides, we are left to contemplate the sheer scale of the forces at play. We are left to wonder what other secrets lie buried beneath the shifting sands, waiting for their own moment to be revealed, and what other fires might one day descend from the silence of the stars to rewrite the history of the ground we walk upon. Imagine the sound of water, where now there is only the parched whistle of the wind. There was a time, distant and green, when the great sand sea was not a sea of quartz and heat, but a vast, sprawling tapestry of life. To stand in the heart of the Gilf Kebir 6,000 years ago would be to stand in a garden. The air would have been thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming acacia, and the horizon would have been broken not by the shimmering heat haze of the deep desert, but by the silver glint of permanent lakes and the slow, rhythmic movement of grazing herds. This was the African humid period, a long breath of moisture that transformed the Sahara into a lush savanna, a place where the ancestors of modern humans walked alongside giraffes and hippos in a landscape that felt eternal. But beneath this vibrant skin of grass and water, the cosmic glass lay in a deep, undisturbed slumber. It had already been there for nearly 30 million years by the time the first rains of the Holocene began to fall. As the climate shifted and the monsoons pushed further north, the yellow fragments were slowly buried under layers of alluvial silt and the decaying matter of 1,000 generations of flora. They became part of the stratigraphy, that silent, vertical record of time where the earth keeps its diary in layers of compressed mud and stone. The glass was an ancient secret even then, a relic of a fire that had long since been forgotten by the world above. It rested in the cool, dark pressure of the earth, shielded from the sun that had once helped create it, as the world transitioned through cycles of ice and warmth, forest and plains. As the millennia passed, the great tilt of the earth began to shift once more. The rains grew sparse and the lakes began to shrink, leaving behind white crusts of salt that cracked under the intensifying heat. The green retreated, the trees withered into skeletal remains, and the soil, no longer held together by the intricate webbing of roots, began to surrender to the wind. This was the onset of the hyper-arid phase, a slow drying that turned a garden into a wasteland. The sediment that had protected the glass for so long was stripped away, layer by layer, by the relentless scouring of the North African gales. In this harsh new world, the sand became a predator. Driven by the wind, the tiny grains of quartz acted like a natural sandpaper, grinding against everything in their path. For the fragments of glass that were beginning to emerge from their earthen cradles, this was a period of refinement. The jagged edges, once sharp enough to slice through bone, were slowly worn down. The wind-driven sand polished the surfaces of the glass, giving them a soft, waxy luster and creating the curious, aerodynamic shapes we find today. Some pieces were sculpted into smooth teardrop forms, while others were etched with delicate pits and grooves, the signature of millions of years of abrasion. This process of wind erosion or saltation is a slow and patient artist, taking eons to smooth a single facet, working in a silence broken only by the hiss of the dunes. The glass did not emerge all at once. It was a gradual revelation, dictated by the migration of the dunes. In the Sahara, the desert is never truly still. It is a slow-motion ocean, where waves of sand, hundreds of feet high, march across the bedrock at a pace of a few meters every year. As these massive dunes moved, they acted like a heavy curtain being pulled back, revealing the treasures hidden on the desert floor before covering them again for centuries. A fragment of glass might see the light of day for a few decades, basking in the harsh Saharan sun, only to be swallowed once more by a mountain of sand that would keep it hidden for another 1,000 years. This constant burial and re-emergence preserved the glass in a state of near perfection, protecting it from the chemical weathering that would have clouded a lesser material. Within this shifting landscape, the glass remained a constant, a golden ghost haunting the ever-changing topography. While the mountains of the Gilf Kebir were worn down by the elements and the great riverbeds of the past were filled with dust, the silica remained largely unchanged, its molecular structure so stable that it defied the passage of deep time. It is a humbling thought to realize that the piece of glass one might hold in their hand today has survived the rise and fall of entire ecosystems. It has seen the Sahara turn from desert to forest and back to desert at least a dozen times over the course of its existence. It has outlasted the mammoths, the Neanderthals, and the very rivers that once carved the valleys of the Libyan plateau. The re-emergence of the glass during the Holocene, our current geological epoch, coincided with the arrival of the first modern humans to wander deep into the drying interior. As the water sources vanished, these early travellers were forced to follow the shrinking oases, crossing the vast stretches of the great sand sea. One can only imagine the wonder of a nomadic hunter, parched and weary, catching a glimpse of a pale yellow spark amidst the red sands. To them, it must have seemed like a piece of the sun itself had fallen and shattered upon the ground. They would have found it scattered in the inter-dune corridors, those flat, rocky plains left behind when a dune moves on, where the bedrock is exposed like an open palm. There is a profound mystery in the way the earth hides and then reveals its history. We often think of the past as something we must dig for, something lost beneath our feet. But in the desert, the past is often lying right on the surface, waiting for the wind to blow the right way. The glass was not found through careful excavation or the reading of ancient maps. It was found because the desert chose to show it. It was a gift of the wind and the shifting sands, a cosmic weapon that had been ground down into jewelry by the patient hands of time. And as the arid winds continue to blow, we must wonder what else is currently being polished in the darkness beneath the dunes. What other remnants of celestial fire are waiting for their turn to be touched by the light of a future sun? The scale of this preservation is difficult for the human mind to fully grasp. We measure our lives in decades, our civilizations in centuries, but the glass measures its life in the movement of tectonic plates and the wobbling of the Earth's axis. It has sat in the silence of the deep earth for 29 million years, a span of time so vast that the very mountains above it have changed their shapes. Throughout the eons of submergence, the glass was a silent witness to a world in constant flux, a steady, unblinking eye of yellow silica, watching as the surface of the planet was rewritten again and again. And so, the fragments waited. They waited through the long, cold nights of the ice ages, when the Sahara was a cold, dry steppe. They waited through the humid pulses, when the hippos wallowed in lakes that no longer exist. They waited as the first stone tools were knapped by hands that were not quite human, and they waited as the first stars were named by people who saw the same sky we see today. The glass is a bridge between the celestial and the terrestrial, between the instantaneous flash of an impact and the agonizingly slow crawl of geological time. It reminds us that the earth is a vessel of memory, and that even the most violent of beginnings can be smoothed into something of quiet, haunting beauty, if given enough millions of years in the dark. Imagine the sound of a stone striking stone, a sharp rhythmic tapping that echoes through the dry canyons of the great sand sea. Long before the first pharaohs dreamed of golden masks, and thousands of years before the first foundations of the pyramids were laid into the silt of the Nile, there were hands that reached into the yellow dust of the desert and pulled out fragments of the stars. These were the hands of the Paleolithic Artisans, the wanderers of the Stone Age who lived in a Sahara that was not a wasteland, but a shifting mosaic of grasslands and seasonal lakes. They moved with the rains, following the migrations of the ibex and the wild cattle, and in their travels they encountered something that defied the logic of the earth. To these early humans, the Libyan Desert Glass must have appeared as a miracle frozen in time. In a world of dull flint and opaque limestone, here was a substance that held the light of the sun. It was translucent, ranging from the color of a pale winter lemon to a deep, honeyed gold, and it possessed a purity that no other stone in the region could match. As they turned the glass over in their palms, feeling its weight and its strange glassy smoothness, they recognized its potential not just as a curiosity, but as a tool of survival. They were masters of lithic technology, a term archaeologists use to describe the sophisticated way our ancestors shaped stone by carefully flaking away its edges, and they found that this celestial glass responded to their touch with a predictable, lethal precision. The glass is nearly pure silica, and when struck at the correct angle, it breaks with a conchoidal fracture, creating edges that are thinner and sharper than a modern surgical scalpel. We can see the evidence of their work in the scattered remains of their campsites, where debitage, or the waste flakes of their tool-making, still lie half-buried in the shifting dunes. These artisans crafted scrapers for cleaning hides, delicate blades for butchering game, and heavy bifaces that fit perfectly into the hollow of a hand. There is a profound stillness in the thought of a hunter looking out over a green Sahara, his fingers stained with the dust of a cosmic impact that occurred 29 million years before his birth, using that ancient fire to provide for his kin. But the utility of the glass was only one side of the story. As the years passed and the nomadic groups moved across the vast stretches of North Africa, the glass began to travel with them. It entered into the great silent trade routes of the deep past, moving from hand to hand, tribe to tribe, as a precious commodity. We find these yellow glass tools hundreds of miles away from the impact site, suggesting that it was highly prized, perhaps even more for its beauty than its edge. In the flickering light of a campfire, the glass would have glowed with an inner warmth, a piece of captured sunlight that never faded. It is easy to imagine that it held a spiritual or symbolic value, perhaps viewed as a gift from the sky or a solidified breath of the gods. The clarity of the glass offered a window into a world they could not otherwise see. In an age where mirrors were non-existent and the only reflection one might find was in a still pool of water, the ability to look through a solid object must have felt like a form of magic. It was a substance that existed between states, solid yet transparent, earthly yet clearly born of something else. This early relationship between man and glass marks a subtle shift in our history. It was one of the first times we sought out a material, not just because it was available, but because it was exceptional. Archaeologists studying the stratigraphy, the layers of earth that act as a timeline of human occupation, have noted that the use of the glass spans multiple eras of the Stone Age. From the Acheulean period, characterized by its heavy, pear-shaped hand axes, to the later Aterian culture with its sophisticated tanged points, the glass remained a constant. It survived the changing climates and the shifting cultures. It saw the Sahara bloom into a lush savanna and saw it wither back into a sea of sand. And through it all, the glass was a bridge. It was a bridge between the raw, terrifying power of the cosmos and the delicate, purposeful intent of a human hand. There is a mystery in the way these people viewed the glass, a question that radiocarbon dating and chemical analysis can never quite answer. Did they have legends about the day the sky fell? Did they look at the craterless landscape and wonder where this yellow stone came from? Or did they simply accept it as a part of the world's natural bounty? We are left to wonder about the stories told in the dark, the myths that might have been woven around these shards of light. The Paleolithic artisans were not mere survivalists. They were observers of the world, and in the Libyan Desert Glass they found a material that matched the brilliance of their own emerging consciousness. As the nomadic routes expanded, the glass became a whisper of the deep desert, carried into the Nile Valley and beyond. It was a herald of things to come, a precursor to the time when humanity would no longer just find glass, but learn to create it. But for the Stone Age traveller, there was no furnace, no bellows, no alchemy. There was only the desert, the wind, and the scattered remains of a star that had fallen so very long ago. They treated each piece with a reverence born of scarcity, flaking away just enough to reveal the sharp truth hidden within the stone. And so, the glass moved through time, tucked into leather pouches and left behind in forgotten caches. It survived the rise and fall of countless small villages whose names have been lost to the wind. It remained patient, buried beneath the dunes of the great sand sea, waiting for the next era of humanity to rediscover its golden glow. The artisans of the Paleolithic had set the stage, proving that this cosmic weapon could be tamed, shaped, and worn as a mark of status or a tool of necessity. They had begun the long process of turning a violent celestial event into a human legacy, a legacy that would eventually find its way into the most sacred treasures of the ancient world. The transition from a simple scraper to a royal jewel was slow, measured in millennia, but the path was already being walked by those first wanderers who saw the light in the sand and decided to pick it up. The weight of a single golden needle resting in the palm of a hand is enough to remind us how the smallest artifacts can carry the heaviest burdens of history. In the year 1922, as the dust of the Valley of the Kings settled around the boots of Howard Carter and his team, they were not merely opening a tomb. They were breaking a seal on a silence that had lasted for over 3,000 years. Amidst the staggering profusion of gold, lapis lazuli and carnelian, one object stood out for its intricate beauty and its quiet, central mystery. It was a heavy pectoral, a ceremonial breastplate designed to be worn by the young king Tutankhamun in his journey through the afterlife. At its heart sat a large, translucent scarab, carved with exquisite precision and glowing with a soft, otherworldly yellow hue. To the modern eye, the scarab appeared like a piece of frozen honey or a drop of solidified sunlight. Howard Carter, a man of immense patience but limited by the mineralogical tools of his era, looked upon the stone and made a note in his records. He identified the centerpiece as chalcedony, a common variety of quartz that was frequently used by Egyptian lapidaries for its durability and range of colors. For decades, this classification stood unquestioned. The scarab was beautiful, certainly, but it was viewed as a product of the known earth, a stone harvested from some forgotten quarry in the eastern desert, or perhaps traded from the distant lands of the south. It fit neatly into the established narrative of Egyptian craftsmanship, a familiar material handled by familiar hands. But as the decades passed and the science of the small began to catch up with the grandeur of the large, whispers of doubt began to circulate among those who studied the king's treasure. The color was not quite right for chalcedony. It possessed a peculiar clarity, a subtle internal glow that seemed to defy the typical grain of quartz. It wasn't until 1998, nearly 80 years after the tomb was first breached, that an Italian mineralogist named Vincenzo de Michele noticed something startling while examining the pectoral in the Cairo Museum. Under the harsh lights of the gallery, the scarab didn't just reflect the light, it seemed to hold it. He suspected that the stone was not a product of slow geological cooling at all, but something far more violent and rare. Modern spectroscopic analysis, a process where scientists bounce light off a material to read its unique chemical signature, finally revealed the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. The scarab was not chalcedony. It was not even a mineral in the traditional sense. It was Libyan Desert Glass. It was the same material that the prehistoric nomads had once used for their blades, now polished to a mirror shine and placed at the very center of the Egyptian cosmos. This revelation shifted the entire perspective of the artifact. It meant that the craftsmen of the 18th dynasty had somehow acquired a material that could only be found in one of the most remote and inhospitable corners of the Great Sand Sea, a place hundreds of miles away from the Nile, across a landscape that would kill an unprepared traveler in a matter of days. We are left to wonder how this piece of the stars found its way into the royal workshops of Thebes. Did a wandering scout happen upon a fragment during a long-forgotten expedition? Or was it passed down through the generations, a relic of the deep past, kept in a treasury because it was recognized as something fundamentally different from the stones of the earth? The Egyptians were keen observers of the natural world, and they possessed a profound sensitivity to the origins of their materials. To them, iron was the metal from heaven, harvested from meteorites long before they learned to smelt it from the ground. It is highly probable that they viewed this yellow glass with a similar reverence, as a gift from the sky, a physical manifestation of the sun's power that had fallen to the sands. The symbolism of the scarab itself deepens the mystery. In the Egyptian mind, the scarab beetle was the earthly representative of Khepri, the god of the rising sun. Just as the beetle rolls a ball of dung across the earth, Khepri was believed to roll the sun across the sky each day, bringing light out of the darkness of the underworld. By carving the scarab from Libyan Desert Glass, the royal jewelers were creating a powerful visual tautology. They were depicting the sun god using a material that was, quite literally, born from a flash of solar-level heat. The yellow glass was not just a stone, it was a captured moment of celestial fire, a fragment of the sun's own radiance made solid so that it might protect the king for all eternity. As we look closer at the pectoral, we see the scarab is flanked by images of the moon and the sun, framed by protective cobras and the wings of Horus. The entire piece is a map of the heavens, a cosmic balance of light and shadow. But the glass at the center remains the most enigmatic element. It represents a bridge between the prehistoric past and the height of dynastic power. The same material that a hunter-gatherer might have used to skin a gazelle 10,000 years earlier was now resting on the chest of a god-king, intended to guide him through the halls of Osiris. The transition from tool to jewel was complete, yet the glass itself remained unchanged, indifferent to the names of the men who held it or the gods they chose to honor. There is a certain irony in the fact that the most precious stone in Tutankhamun's collection was one that had been discarded by the sands for millennia. It reminds us of the limits of our own knowledge, of how a simple misidentification by a modern archaeologist can obscure a profound connection to the deep past. For 60 years we thought we knew what the scarab was. We had labeled it, categorized it, and moved on. But the glass held its secret patiently, waiting for our technology to catch up with its reality. It serves as a quiet warning that much of what we see in the ancient world is filtered through our own assumptions, and that the truth is often far more strange and celestial than we dare to imagine. As the night air cools and the mind begins to wander through the silent corridors of the Cairo Museum, one can almost feel the heat of the impact that created that yellow stone. It is a heat that transcends time, a bridge between a violent moment in the atmosphere and the quiet, darkened tomb of a young king. The glass is a survivor. It survived the impact, it survived the shifting dunes of the Sahara, and it survived the rise and fall of empires. Even now it sits behind glass of a different kind, staring back at us with its pale, lemon-colored eye, a silent witness to the fact that our world has always been touched by the infinite, even if we are only just beginning to recognize the marks it leaves behind. The journey of the glass did not end with the burial of the king. While the scarab lay in the dark, protected by tons of rock and the legends of a curse, the source of the glass remained out there, hidden in the shifting patterns of the great sand sea. It would take centuries more for the modern world to find the place where the sky once touched the earth and to realize that the treasure of the Pharaoh was merely a single drop from a vast, forgotten ocean of fire. As we move deeper into the story, we leave the golden halls of the kings and return to the silence of the desert, to the place where the glass still waits, half buried in the dunes, holding the memory of a day when the sun came down to the sand. The smell of heated wax and the rhythmic, abrasive sound of stone against stone filled the workshops of the royal lapidaries, those master craftsmen who served the divine lineage of the Nile. To work with the yellow-green glass was to engage in a silent dialogue with a material that possessed no earthly lineage. Unlike the soft steatite or the predictable grain of limestone, this silica glass was a temperamental captive of the desert. It was harder than most metals the Egyptians possessed, a frozen remnant of a thermal event so intense it had bypassed the natural order of geology. The lapidary began his work not with a hammer, but with gravity and patience. To shape the cosmic glass into the form of a scarab required a mastery of percussion and abrasion that took a lifetime to perfect. They used copper drills tipped with emery or fine quartz sand, grinding away the surface atom by atom, hour after hour, until the translucent mass began to yield. There was a constant, haunting risk in every movement. One misplaced strike, one sudden change in temperature, or one fraction of an ounce of excess pressure could cause the entire piece to shatter into 1,000 useless shards. The glass held internal stresses born from its violent birth in the atmosphere, and to carve it was to slowly release that ancient tension without allowing it to explode. As the artisan labored, the rough, frosted exterior of the desert glass began to vanish, revealing a clarity that seemed to glow from within. They chose the form of the scarab beetle, the khepri, not merely for its aesthetic beauty, but for its profound symbolic weight. To the ancient mind, the scarab was the embodiment of transformation and the daily rebirth of the sun. Just as the beetle rolled its ball of dung across the earth, the sun god was thought to roll the solar disk across the heavens. By carving this specific glass, a substance literally forged by a fallen star, into the shape of the scarab, the craftsmen were tethering the celestial power of the sky to the eternal cycle of life and death. It was a poetic symmetry that the Egyptians understood instinctively. The glass that fell from the heavens would now serve as the vessel for the soul's journey back toward the light. The polishing process was perhaps the most meditative stage of the journey. Using finer and finer silts gathered from the banks of the river, the lapidary would rub the surface of the glass until the scratches of the copper tools disappeared. Slowly, the dull, waxy surface transformed into a liquid brilliance. When held up to the oil lamps of the workshop, the glass would have cast a pale, ethereal light, a ghostly yellow-green that mimicked the color of the young papyrus shoots or the shimmering haze of the horizon at dawn. It was a color that represented health, vitality, and the lush vegetation of the afterlife, yet it possessed a clarity that no emerald or peridot could match. Once the central scarab was perfected, it was not left to stand alone. The Egyptians were masters of color theory and symbolic resonance, and they sought to surround this piece of the sky with materials that reflected the harmony of the universe. The glass was set into a heavy pectoral of beaten gold, the metal of the gods, which was believed to be the literal flesh of the immortals. Gold never tarnished and never decayed, making it the only fitting cradle for a stone that had survived the fires of the firmament. To provide a contrast to the pale yellow of the glass, the jewelers brought in the deep midnight blue of lapis lazuli. This stone had to be brought from the distant mountains of what we now call Afghanistan, traveling thousands of miles across deserts and through the hands of countless traders. Its presence in the jewelry of the pharaoh was a testament to the reach of his power, but also to the symbolic need for the blue of the deep heavens to frame the yellow of the sun. Beside the lapis, they set vibrant pieces of carnelian, a stone the color of a setting sun or a beating heart. The final composition was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a cosmic map. The red carnelian represented the blood and heat of the earth. The blue lapis lazuli represented the infinite depths of the night sky, and at the very center, the Saharan glass scarab sat as the mediator, the light that emerges from the darkness, the sun that rises from the underworld. Each element was held in place by delicate cloisons, small cells of gold that kept the various stones from touching, creating a mosaic of the universe that the king would carry upon his chest into the tomb. As the years passed and the pectoral was finished, the lapidary might have paused to wonder at the origin of the central stone. Did he know that it had once been sand, vaporized and fused in a moment of unimaginable heat? Or did he simply feel a strange coldness in the material that set it apart from the stones of the earth? We can only imagine the silence of the workshop as the final polish was applied, and the cosmic weapon, now tamed and beautiful, was prepared for its long sleep in the darkness of the Valley of the Kings. The transition from raw desert glass to a royal artifact represents a bridge between two worlds. On one side, there is the raw, chaotic power of a cosmic impact, a force capable of leveling forests and melting the very ground. On the other, there is the human impulse to find meaning in the wreckage, to take the shards of a catastrophe and grind them into something sacred. The Egyptians did not fear the glass. They recognized it. They saw in its translucent depths a reflection of the divine fire that governed the tides and the seasons. In the quiet of the tomb, the glass remained unchanged for over 3,000 years, while empires rose and fell above the sand, while the very language of the hieroglyphs was forgotten. The scarab held its glow in the absolute blackness of the burial chamber. It was a piece of the stars waiting to be rediscovered, a silent witness to the fact that the history of humanity has always been intertwined with the history of the heavens. The lapidary's art had ensured that the glass would survive, but the mystery of its creation would remain buried even longer, hidden in the vast, shifting dunes of the great sand sea, where the wind continues to uncover fragments of the day the sky fell. As we contemplate the steady hands that carved such a delicate thing, we are reminded of the limits of our own modern perspective. We often view the ancient world through the lens of primitive technology, yet their ability to manipulate this unforgiving material suggests a level of patience and understanding that we have perhaps lost. They worked with the rhythm of the sun and the river, seeing no distinction between the science of the stone and the spirit of the stars. To them, the glass was not a geological anomaly to be categorized. It was a piece of the eternal, a physical fragment of a story that began long before the first pyramid was ever conceived. And so, the scarab remains, a testament to a time when the gap between the earth and the heavens was bridged by the skill of a craftsman's hand and the fire of a falling star. A single grain of sand is a heavy burden when multiplied by the distance of 1,000 miles. To look upon the golden scarab in the quiet of a museum is to see a finished masterpiece, but we often forget the grueling silent odyssey that brought the raw glass from the great sand sea to the jeweller's bench in the Nile Valley. This was not a simple journey of convenience. The source of the glass lay hundreds of kilometers into the deep interior, a landscape of shifting dunes and scorching winds that even the most seasoned desert dwellers viewed with a mixture of reverence and dread. The logistics of such an undertaking in the Bronze Age, the era when humanity first mastered the blending of copper and tin, defy our modern understanding of efficiency. There were no paved roads, no permanent wells, and no maps other than the ones etched into the memories of nomadic guides. To retrieve the glass, expeditions had to navigate a sea of sand that swallowed footprints as soon as they were made. They moved by the stars, mirroring the very celestial origins of the stone they sought. We must imagine the slow, rhythmic swaying of pack animals, the scent of parched leather, and the absolute silence of the deep desert, broken only by the occasional crack of a cooling stone as the sun dipped below the horizon. As the years passed, a sophisticated system of desert waypoints began to emerge, small hidden caches of water and supplies tucked away in the shadows of rocky outcrops. These were the lifelines of the glass trade. Archaeology reveals traces of these stops, scattered pottery shards and the remains of ancient campfires, marking a trail that bridged two entirely different worlds. It was a journey that could take weeks, or even months, depending on the temper of the sands. The glass was not merely a commodity. It was a prize won through endurance and a deep, intuitive understanding of a hostile environment. In these remote reaches, historians believe a practice known as silent trade may have flourished. It is a haunting concept. Two groups of people who do not speak the same language, or perhaps who fear direct contact, exchanging goods by leaving them at a designated spot. One party would lay out their offerings, perhaps fine linen, dried fish, or copper tools, and retreat into the dunes. The desert nomads would then approach, leave a portion of the yellow glass, and withdraw. If the balance was deemed fair, the goods were taken. If not, the dance continued until an agreement was reached without a single word being spoken. This phantom commerce allowed the sunstone to flow out of the void
and into the hands of the pharaohs, shrouded in mystery even to those who purchased it. The reach of this cosmic material extended far beyond the borders of Egypt. While the scarab of Tutankhamun is the most famous example, evidence of the Libyan Desert Glass has been whispered of in other Mediterranean archaeological sites, appearing as tiny, precious fragments in the treasuries of distant city-states. It has been found in contexts that suggest it was treated with the same weight as lapis lazuli from Afghanistan or amber from the Baltic. Through the study of stratigraphy, the analysis of soil layers to determine the age of artifacts, we see that this glass was circulating at a time when the world was becoming interconnected for the first time. A piece of a meteorite's fury found in the heart of Africa might eventually find its way into a necklace worn by a priestess in Crete or a merchant in Mycenae. The prestige associated with owning a piece of the glass was immense. In a world where most objects were made of clay, wood, or common stone, a substance that was translucent, honey-coloured, and harder than most metals was nothing short of miraculous. It was often referred to in hushed tones as the sunstone, a physical manifestation of the sun god's power. To possess it was to claim a connection to the divine, to carry a fragment of the sky itself. It was a marker of status that transcended mere wealth. It was a symbol of cosmic favour. We find ourselves wondering what the common people of the Nile thought as they saw these gems gleaming on the breasts of their rulers.
Did they know of the fire that had fallen from the heavens thousands of years prior, or did they simply see a light that did not belong to this earth? The glass served as a bridge between the known and the unknown, a tether between the mundane reality of the river's harvest and the terrifying, beautiful vastness of the cosmos. As we look back through the lens of deep time, the trade of the Saharan glass reminds us that the ancient world was never truly isolated. The red sands were not a barrier, but a filter, allowing only the most precious and resilient materials to pass through. The glass was a survivor of a celestial impact, a survivor of the desert's heat, and a survivor of a journey that would break lesser men. It arrived in the workshops of the Nile not just as a raw material, but as a legend in the making, carrying with it the dust of the deep desert and the lingering chill of outer space. The story of its transport is a testament to human curiosity and the lengths to which we will go to touch the extraordinary. Even now, as we map the desert with satellites and scan the soil with modern sensors, the true nature of those ancient trade routes remains partially obscured, hidden beneath the shifting dunes of the great sand sea, waiting for the wind to reveal another fragment of the sun. For many years, the silence of the great sand sea was matched only by the silence of the laboratory, where geologists turned the pale yellow glass over in their hands, searching for a signature that the desert refused to provide. It is a peculiar thing to hold a piece of the heavens and yet have no map of where it fell. In the early decades of the 20th century, a quiet but persistent debate began to simmer within the scientific community, a slow-burning disagreement that would last for nearly 70 years. One camp of researchers looked at the vast fields of glass and saw the remnants of an ancient, violent volcanic eruption, a terrestrial fire rising from the belly of the earth to melt the sands from below. They pointed to the local geology, searching for hidden calderas or deep-seated vents that might have once spewed molten silica across the horizon. But another group looked upward toward the cold, dark reaches of the void. They suspected that the glass was not born of the earth at all, but was instead the scar of a cosmic visitor, a messenger of iron and ice that had collided with our world with the force of 1,000 suns. The difficulty lay in the absence of a smoking gun. When a massive object strikes the earth, it typically leaves behind a circular scar, a crater rimmed with upturned rock and filled with the debris of the impact. Yet in the region where the Libyan Desert Glass is found, the topography is stubbornly flat, dominated by the endless, undulating rhythm of the dunes. There was no yawning abyss, no jagged mountain ring to mark the site of a cataclysm. As the decades passed, the volcanic theory began to wither under the weight of chemical analysis. Yet the meteoric theory remained a ghost, haunted by the lack of a visible home. It was as if a great crime had been committed, but the weapon and the scene of the struggle had been wiped clean by the shifting sands of time. As the 21st century dawned, our perspective shifted from the ground to the stars. Scientists began to utilize the cold, unblinking eyes of orbital satellites, peering down through the haze of the atmosphere to map the desert in ways the early explorers could only have dreamed of. In 2006, a glimmer of a breakthrough appeared. Far to the south of the main glass fields, researchers identified a massive circular feature spanning 31 kilometers, a structure they named the Kebera crater. For a brief moment, it seemed the mystery was solved. The scale was right, the location was plausible, and the relief of finally finding a source was palpable. But as teams moved in to study the site, the certainty began to dissolve like salt in water. The Kebera structure was ancient, far older than the 26 million years assigned to the glass, and it lacked the specific chemical fingerprints that would link it to the yellow gems scattered hundreds of miles away. The search, it seemed, had led to a dead end, leaving the glass once again orphaned in the deep desert. However, the glass itself held secrets that no satellite could see, secrets locked within its molecular structure that could only be teased out by the intense scrutiny of the electron microscope. Within the translucent depths of certain fragments, researchers discovered something extraordinary. Tiny, microscopic crystals of a mineral known as rhyodite. This is a rare, high-pressure polymorph of zircon, a mineral that only forms under conditions of unimaginable stress. To create rhyodite, the pressure must exceed 30 gigapascals, a weight equivalent to hundreds of elephants balanced on the head of a pin. Such pressures are never found in volcanic eruptions, nor are they produced by the slow, grinding movements of the Earth's crust. They are found in only two places, deep within the mantle of the planet, or at the moment of a hypervelocity cosmic impact. Alongside the rhyodite, scientists found traces of osmium and iridium, elements that are rare in the Earth's crust, but abundant in asteroids. The evidence was becoming undeniable. The glass was indeed the result of an impact, but the mystery of the missing crater remained. How could a force powerful enough to liquefy miles of desert sand and create high-pressure minerals fail to leave a hole in the ground? The answer, it seems, lies not in a solid strike, but in something far more ethereal and terrifying. Modern computer modeling began to suggest a new possibility, a phenomenon known as a massive mid-air bolide explosion. Imagine a giant fragment of an asteroid or a comet, perhaps 80 meters wide, screaming through the atmosphere at tens of thousands of miles per hour. As it hits the thicker air near the surface, the pressure becomes too great for the object to maintain its integrity. Instead of hitting the ground as a solid mass, it detonates in the sky. A thermal blast of such incredible magnitude that it creates a localized sun. The air itself becomes a furnace, reaching temperatures of several thousand degrees Celsius in a matter of seconds. In this scenario, the heat radiation is so intense that it melts the surface of the desert instantly, turning the dunes into a lake of liquid fire before the shock wave even arrives. Because the explosion happens several miles above the Earth, there is no concentrated point of impact to dig out a traditional crater. Instead, there is only a vast, scorched footprint, a wide area of melted earth that cools rapidly into the glass we find today. It is a haunting image, a silent flash of light, a moment of absolute heat that transforms the landscape forever, and then a return to the stillness of the desert, leaving behind only the yellow fragments as a memory of the fire that fell from the sky. This theory of a touchdown explosion explains why the glass is spread over such a wide area, and why it is so remarkably pure. The sand was melted where it lay, fused by a ghostly hand that never actually touched the ground. It suggests that our planet is more vulnerable than we often care to admit, subject to invisible hammers that can reshape the surface without leaving a permanent scar. As we look at the glass today, we are looking at the result of a near miss, a cosmic brush with destruction that occurred long before humans walked these sands, yet left a legacy that we still hold in our hands, wondering at the power of the light that once turned the desert to jewels. Even with this understanding, the desert remains a place of deep, layered history. We speak of millions of years, of pressures and temperatures that defy the imagination, yet we must also remember the people who found these stones and saw in them something more than just geology. To the ancients, the origin was perhaps less important than the essence, the way the light caught the edges of a carved scarab, or the way a blade of glass felt in the palm. They lived in a world where the boundaries between the earth and the heavens were thin, where a stone found in the sand could be a gift from a god or a fragment of a fallen star. As we continue to probe the great sand sea with our sensors and our math, we find that the more we learn, the more the mystery deepens, drawing us further into the golden silence of the dunes. Deep within the structure of the glass, buried beneath the deceptive clarity of its lime-yellow surface, lies a message written in a language of elements. To find it, one must look past the aesthetic beauty of the scarabs and the sharp edges of the blades, peering instead into the very atoms that make up the matrix. It is here that the desert reveals its most profound secret, a chemical fingerprint that does not belong to our world. When researchers first subjected the Libyan Desert Glass to modern spectroscopic analysis, they were searching for the signature of the Earth, the familiar profile of terrestrial sand melted by some ancient unknown heat. But what they found was a strange and heavy presence. Traces of iridium and osmium began to appear in the data, shimmering like ghosts in the machine. On the surface of our planet, these elements are vanishingly rare, having long ago sunk into the molten iron core of the Earth during its violent formation. To find them here, scattered through the translucent body of the glass, is to look upon the debris of the cosmos. These are the markers of the chondritic signature, a term scientists use to describe the primitive material of the early solar system, the stony remnants of asteroids that have wandered the cold dark for billions of years before finding a home in the Egyptian sands. The presence of these metals suggests that the glass is not merely melted earth, but a fusion of the terrestrial and the divine. It is as if the very heart of a celestial traveller was ground into the grain of the desert, leaving behind a residue that defies the simple explanations of volcanic fire or lightning strikes. As we hold a fragment of this glass, we are holding a record of a moment when the barrier between the stars and the sand was obliterated. This chemical inheritance invites a quiet comparison to other legendary stones born of fire and shadow. In the dense forests of Tasmania, one finds the Darwin glass, a dark and twisted material born from a similar impact, though it lacks the ethereal glow of the Saharan variety. Further north, in the heart of Europe, the Moldavite of the Czech Republic tells a story of a great green spray of molten earth thrown across the horizon nearly 15 million years ago. These stones, known as tektites, are the children of catastrophe. Yet the Libyan Desert Glass stands apart. It is purer, consisting of nearly 98% silica, and it carries within it a different kind of memory. While the Moldavite is often pitted and dark, the glass of the great sand sea remains a vessel of light, and its secrets are not only found in its heavy metals, but in the tiny microscopic voids that interrupt its clarity. If you were to look through a powerful lens at a sliver of this glass, you would see a galaxy of tiny bubbles frozen in mid-flight. These are not merely imperfections, they are ancient capsules of time. Each bubble contains a microscopic sample of the atmosphere as it existed 29 million years ago. Within these tiny pockets of air, the chemistry of a lost epoch is preserved, held in a pressurized grip by the cooling silica. They tell of a world before the rise of the great ice ages, a world where the Sahara was perhaps not yet a sea of sand, but a vast, sprawling savanna teeming with life that has long since vanished into the fossil record. These bubbles are the breath of the ancient world, caught in the throat of a cosmic event. They reveal that the heat required to create this glass was so intense and the cooling so rapid that the very air was trapped before it could escape the molten flow. It is a haunting thought that as we breathe the dry air of the modern desert, we are standing over a landscape that holds the exhaled breath of a forgotten era, locked away in a tomb of yellow crystal. The more we examine these chemical fingerprints, the more we realize that the glass is a bridge across deep time. It connects the birth of the solar system, evidenced by the iridium and osmium, to the specific geological moment of the impact, and finally to the humans who, millions of years later, would find these stones and recognize them as something extraordinary. We begin to wonder if the ancients, in their own way, sensed this extraterrestrial origin. They did not have mass spectrometers or electron microscopes, but they lived in constant dialogue with the sky. To them, a stone that appeared in a place where no volcanoes existed, a stone that possessed the color of the sun, but the coldness of a rock, could only have come from the realm of the gods. As the years pass and our instruments become more refined, we find that the chondritic signature is not just a scientific classification. It is a testament to the violence and the beauty of the universe's creative power. The glass is a scar, a beautiful, translucent scar left by a weapon of the heavens that was ground into jewelry by the hands of a rising civilization. Meanwhile, the desert continues to shift, the dunes migrating with a slow and rhythmic patience that mimics the turning of the tides. With every passing century, more fragments of the glass are uncovered by the wind, and more are buried deep beneath the weight of the sand. We are left to contemplate the vastness of the timeline we are treading upon. 29 million years is a span of time that the human mind struggles to truly grasp. It is a duration that renders the entirety of human history, from the first sharpened stone to the launch of the first satellite, as nothing more than a brief, flickering candle flame in the dark. And yet, we are the ones who have found the glass. We are the ones who have decoded the iridium and the osmium, and who have peered into the bubbles of ancient air. In doing so, we have linked our brief moment to the deep time of the cosmos. We find ourselves asking, what other signatures remain hidden in the silence of the dunes? What other stories are written in the chemistry of the earth, waiting for a wandering soul to look down and see the light catching a fragment of the stars? The mystery of the glass is not merely in how it was formed, but in how it persists. It survives the erosion of the wind and the blistering heat of the sun, remaining as a clear, silent witness to a day when the sky fell. As we move deeper into the heart of this story, we must look beyond the chemical and the physical and begin to consider the landscape itself, the great sand sea, a place that guards its secrets with a fierce and golden jealousy. The glass is a fragment of a larger puzzle, a single note in a symphony of fire and time that began long before the first pyramid was dreamed of, and which will continue long after the last of our cities has returned to the dust. In the quiet of the laboratory, the sensors hum, tracing the lines of osmium and iridium, mapping the extraterrestrial heart of the Sahara. But out in the desert, under the vast and wheeling stars, the glass simply waits, a pale yellow treasure, cold to the touch, holding the heat of 1,000 suns within its silent chemical memory. Consider the strange alchemy of the human spirit, which looks upon a scene of absolute devastation and sees the potential for grace. There is a profound, almost haunting contrast in the life of this yellow glass. a journey that begins with a violence beyond human comprehension and ends resting gently against the skin of a king. To understand the Saharan glass is to understand a bridge stretched across the impossible, a tether between the cold, vacuum-filled reaches of the cosmos and the warm, pulsing reality of an ancient civilization. When that celestial body tore through our atmosphere 29 million years ago, it did not bring life, nor did it bring the slow building blocks of evolution. It brought a singular, blinding moment of chaos, a thermal pulse that turned the very foundations of the earth into liquid light. And yet, as the millennia drifted by like the shifting dunes of the great sand sea, that chaos was refined. The jagged edges of the catastrophe were smoothed by the relentless wind and the abrasive touch of the desert floor, until what remained was not a scar but an ornament. We find ourselves drawn to this glass because it represents our oldest and most persistent habit, the tendency to find meaning and utility in the wake of natural disasters. Where the earth was scorched and the atmosphere itself was set ablaze, the Neolithic hunters and later the Egyptian artisans saw something else entirely. They did not see the debris of a dying star or the wreckage of a planetary collision. They saw a fragment of the sun that had somehow fallen to earth and frozen in the sand. As the years passed, this material became a vessel for a singular cosmic moment, preserved in a wearable form. It is a strange thought to dwell upon while drifting toward sleep, that a piece of jewelry could hold within its chemical lattice the memory of a temperature higher than the surface of the sun. When the Egyptian jewelers carved the great scarab for the pectoral of Tutankhamun, they were working with a substance that defied the laws of their known world. They lack the modern language of astrophysics. They knew nothing of meteoric impacts or the kinetic energy of bolides, but they felt the inherent power of the stone. To them, it was a talisman of transformation. In the quiet workshops of the Nile Valley, the artisans would have felt the weight of the glass, noting its peculiar clarity and the way it caught the light differently than the common carnelian or lapis lazuli. It was a bridge between the celestial and the terrestrial, a physical manifestation of the heavens reaching down to touch the sand. By shaping it into the form of the scarab, the symbol of Khepri, the god of the rising sun and eternal renewal, they were completing a philosophical circle. They were taking a remnant of a destructive fire and turning it into a symbol of life's persistence. This is the quiet irony of the Saharan glass, that a weapon of the cosmos, capable of erasing entire ecosystems in a heartbeat, eventually became a silent witness to the vanity and the hope of a young pharaoh. We often think of history as a linear progression of events, but the story of this glass suggests something more cyclical and mysterious. It suggests that the earth is constantly collecting these fragments of the deep past, treasures dropped from the pockets of the universe and hidden beneath the waves of the desert. The glass sits in the palm of the hand, cool and smooth, belying the roar of its creation. It invites us to contemplate the limits of what we know, for even with our sophisticated senses and our understanding of isotopic ratios, we are still like those ancient artisans, staring into the translucent depths of the pale green stone and wondering what other secrets remain buried beneath the dunes. There is a certain comfort in the deep time represented by such an object. In the grand scale of 29 million years, the rise and fall of empires, the building of the pyramids, and the modern age of glass and steel are but a flickering shadow. The glass has seen the Sahara when it was a lush savanna teeming with life, and it has seen it as the hyper-arid wasteland it is today. It has survived the slow crawl of tectonic plates and the violent fluctuations of the Earth's climate, remaining unchanged in its essential nature. To wear such a thing, or even to contemplate it, is to step outside the frantic pace of our own lives and breathe the rarefied air of the eternal. As the mind wanders through the silent corridors of history, one cannot help but wonder how many other cosmic weapons are currently being ground into the jewelry of the future. Perhaps there are stones yet to be found, hidden in the most remote corners of our world, that hold within them the stories of even older catastrophes, stories that we are not yet ready to hear. The human tendency to seek beauty in the aftermath of destruction is perhaps our most enduring trait. It is a way of reclaiming the narrative, of taking the cold, indifferent forces of the universe and weaving them into the tapestry of our own cultural identity. The glass is a reminder that we are never truly separate from the stars. We walk upon a planet that is constantly being reshaped by the touch of the heavens, a world that is a patchwork of domestic stone and extraterrestrial visitors. In the laboratory, the scientists may speak of shock metamorphism and high-pressure polymorphs, but in the heart of the wanderer, the glass remains a piece of the divine. It is a frozen spark from a fire that burned before the first human voice ever broke the silence of the plains. And so, the transition from chaos to ornament is complete. The scream of the impact has faded into the soft clinking of beads on a necklace. The terrifying heat has been replaced by the gentle warmth of sunlight filtering through a museum window. But the essence of the glass remains, a silent, chemical memory of the day the sky fell. It waits for the next seeker, the next dreamer, to pick it up and feel the weight of those 29 million years. It is a bridge that we cross every time we look up at the night sky and then back down at the earth beneath our feet. A reminder that the boundary between the world we know and the vast, unknown cosmos is as thin and as clear as a shard of yellow glass. The desert wind continues its work, unearthing new fragments and burying others, ensuring that the mystery of the Saharan glass will persist as long as there are sands to shift. It is a story with no final chapter, only a series of long, quiet pauses. A narrative written in the language of silica and starlight, waiting to be read by anyone who stops to listen to the silence of the deep desert. A single grain of sand when viewed under a microscope is a jagged mountain of crystal, yet when millions of these grains are swept together by the Khamsin winds, they become a soft and fluid ocean that hides the secrets of the great sand sea. Today, this remote corner of the eastern Sahara is no longer the unreachable void it once was to the explorers of the 1930s. The silence of the dunes is now occasionally broken by the low hum of 4x4 engines and the crunch of tires over the Seria, the gravel plains that serve as the graveyard for the cosmic glass. But as the world has drawn closer to this mysterious site, a new kind of silence has begun to settle over the yellow shards, a silence born of protection and the slow realization that these fragments are a finite treasure of our planet's history. In recent decades, the government of Egypt has recognized that the Libyan Desert Glass is not merely a geological curiosity, but a heritage of the earth itself. Strict regulations now govern the Great Sand Sea, turning the vast stretches of the Gilf Kabir and the surrounding plateaus into protected zones. To remove a piece of this glass is no longer a simple matter of picking up a souvenir from the sand. It is now an act that requires permits and carries the weight of international law. The export of the glass is tightly controlled, an effort to ensure that the Canary Stone remains where it fell nearly 30 million years ago. These laws represent a shift in our relationship with the desert, moving from an age of discovery and extraction to an age of stewardship, where the value of a site lies not in what can be taken from it, but in the integrity of the landscape as it has existed since deep time. And so, the modern desert guardian is no longer a lone nomad or a weary explorer, but a collective effort to preserve the stratigraphy of the sands. Stratigraphy is a simple concept with a beautiful name. It is the study of layers, the way time stacks itself in the earth like the pages of a dusty book. When a glass hunter removes a shard from the desert floor to sell it on the private market, a page is effectively torn out of that book. The context is lost. The way the glass sat in relation to the ancient tools of the Aterian people, or the way it was polished on one side by 10,000 years of prevailing winds. Scientists worry that, as the most beautiful and translucent pieces are harvested by collectors, the record of the cosmic impact will be thinned, leaving only the scarred and opaque remnants for future generations to study. Meanwhile, the local cultures that skirt the edges of the great sand sea have developed their own relationship with the glass, one that is woven into the fabric of folklore rather than the cold data of geology. To the Bedouin who have navigated these dunes for centuries, the glass is often seen as a gift from the sky, though its origins are explained through the lens of the spiritual world rather than atmospheric physics. Some stories speak of the glass as petrified sunlight, frozen in place during a time when the sun descended to touch the earth. Others view the fragments as protective amulets, stones that carry the baraka, or blessing, of the desert's ancient spirits. It is said that carrying a piece of the yellow glass can ward off the heat of the noon sun, or guide a lost traveller back to the safety of the oasis. In these modern desert cultures, the glass is a bridge between the physical world and the unseen forces that govern the wilderness, a tangible piece of a reality that is far older and more powerful than human memory. Despite the rise of tourism, the Great Sand Sea remains a formidable opponent to those who seek to uncover its final truths. Scientific expeditions continue to venture into the heat, equipped with satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, yet they often find that the desert is reluctant to yield its secrets. These modern researchers are looking for more than just glass. They are searching for the elusive crater that many believe must exist, despite the evidence suggesting an airburst. They dig into the paleosols, the ancient, fossilized soils buried beneath the dunes, hoping to find a layer of iridium or shocked minerals that would provide a definitive map of the explosion's reach. Every few years, a new team arrives, their tents looking like small white specks against the towering walls of sand. They stay for weeks, enduring the abrasive winds and the freezing desert nights, driven by the same quiet obsession that fueled Howard Carter and Patrick Clayton. As the years pass, the impact of modern footfalls on the desert floor becomes a concern for those who love the silence of the Sahara. The glass hunters of the 21st century are often driven by the high prices that Libyan Desert Glass commands in the gem trade, where it is often faceted into jewelry or sold as healing crystals. There is a strange irony in this, that a weapon of cosmic destruction, born from a heat that would have vaporized any living thing in its path, is now worn as a delicate ornament or held in the hand for meditation. It speaks to our human desire to domesticate the wild and the terrifying, to take a fragment of a prehistoric nightmare and turn it into something of beauty and light. Yet, for the scientists who study the glass, the true beauty lies in its jagged, raw form, the way it captures bubbles of nitrogen and oxygen from an atmosphere that existed long before the first human stood upright. The desert, however, has a way of erasing the presence of man. The tracks of the heavy expedition trucks are eventually filled by the shifting grains, and the campsites are buried under the migrating dunes. The regulations and the borders drawn on maps are invisible to the wind. In the deep desert, time does not move in the linear fashion we are accustomed to in our cities. It moves in cycles of erosion and deposition, of burial and resurrection. The glass that is visible today may be hidden tomorrow, and pieces that have been entombed for 1,000,000 years may suddenly find themselves blinking in the harsh glare of the modern sun. It is a slow, rhythmic breathing of the earth,
a process that makes our current laws and scientific theories seem like fleeting whispers in a gale. As we look upon a piece of this glass in a museum or a private collection, we are seeing a survivor. It has survived the violence of its birth, the crushing weight of the shifting sands, and the slow abrasive kiss of the wind over eons. It has seen the Sahara transform from a lush savanna filled with lakes and life into the hyper-arid wilderness it is today. It has been held by the hands of Neolithic hunters and the gloved fingers of modern geologists, and through it all, it has remained unchanged, a frozen moment of celestial fire. The modern desert guardian is perhaps not a person or a law, but the desert itself, a vast, inhospitable expanse that protects its treasures by simply being too large and too difficult to fully conquer. The mystery of the Saharan glass persists because the desert allows it to, keeping the most profound answers tucked away in the hollows of the dunes, where the starlight still touches the sand with the same cold, ancient light that created the glass so very long ago.
The wind has a specific voice when it moves across the great sand sea, a dry, rhythmic sigh that carries the weight of 1,000,000 years in every grain of grit. It is a sound that predates language, predates the first upright footsteps of our ancestors, and it will likely be the last sound heard on this planet long after the final city has been claimed by the dust. In this vast, undulating landscape, the passage of time is not measured by the ticking of a clock or the turning of a calendar page, but by the slow, inevitable movement of the dunes. They are like waves in slow motion, cresting over centuries, burying valleys and revealing ancient secrets with a patience that makes the human lifespan seem like little more than a flicker of light against a dark curtain. Deep within this shifting geometry lies the silica, the frozen breath of a cosmic impact that has seen the world change from a lush savanna to a scorched wasteland. And yet, the glass remains unchanged, cold, sharp, and indifferent to the rise and fall of the empires that have occasionally sought it out. As the day begins to surrender its heat, the quality of the atmosphere undergoes a subtle transformation. The harsh, bleaching glare of the midday sun softens into a spectrum of ochre and violet, and it is in this precise moment of transition that the Saharan glass truly comes alive. To an untrained eye, the desert floor might appear uniform, a repetitive expanse of beige and tan, but as the light hits the horizon at a shallow angle, the scattered fragments of the impact event begin to catch the final rays. They do not merely reflect the light, they seem to hold it, glowing with a soft inner luminescence that feels entirely alien to the terrestrial world around them. One might stumble upon a piece half buried in the lee of a dune, its translucent yellow body shimmering like a trapped star. It is a haunting sight, a reminder that this ground was once the site of a violence so profound it transformed the very earth into jewelry. The desert acts as a meticulous curator, constantly rearranging its collection. A shard of glass that was held in the hand of a Neolithic hunter 10,000 years ago might have spent the last 5 millennia hidden beneath 60 feet of sand, only to be breathed upon by a seasonal wind and nudged back into the open air today. There is a cyclical nature to this process, a rhythmic unveiling that ensures the desert never gives up all its secrets at once. We are merely witnesses to a tiny fraction of what lies beneath. For every piece of Libyan desert glass that has been catalogued by a scientist or polished by a jeweler, there are millions more resting in the deep dark of the dunes, waiting for their turn to see the sun again. They are the silent observers of history. They were there when the rain stopped falling and the rivers dried up, and they were there when the first explorers arrived with their thirst for discovery and their fragile maps. When we hold a piece of this glass, we are touching something that has achieved a state of permanence we can scarcely comprehend. Silica is one of the most stable compounds in the universe, a material that resists the ravages of wind, water, and time with a stubborn grace, while the bones of the creatures that lived during the impact have long since crumbled into nothingness, and while the very mountains have been ground down by erosion, the glass remains. It is a meditation on the transience of life compared to the endurance of the mineral world. Our lives are defined by change, by growth and decay, by the frantic pulse of a heartbeat, but the glass exists in a state of eternal stillness. It does not age, it does not tarnish, it simply is. The scales of time involved here are so vast they defy our usual methods of understanding. We speak of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt or the Roman Empire as if they were ancient. Yet, to the Saharan glass, these are but the briefest of interludes. The glass was already 28 million years old when Tutankhamun's craftsmen carved it into the shape of a scarab. It had already sat in the silence of the sands for longer than the entire history of the human species. This realization brings with it a sense of profound insignificance, but also a strange kind of peace. In the presence of such deep time, our individual worries and the frantic pace of our modern world seem to dissolve. We are reminded that we are part of a much larger, much older story, a story written in fire and stone, stretching back to the very formation of the solar system. As the shadows stretch out across the sand, turning the ripples of the dunes into long, dark fingers, one can almost feel the weight of the ages pressing down. The desert at dusk is a place of ghosts and echoes. It is easy to imagine the ancient travellers who passed through here, perhaps stopping to pick up a curious yellow stone, wondering at its clarity and its sharpness. They would have had no words for bolides or atmospheric airbursts, no understanding of the chemical composition of the sand, and yet they felt the same wonder we feel today. They recognized that these stones were special, that they belonged to the heavens rather than the earth. This shared sense of awe creates a bridge across the millennia, linking us to the people of the distant past through a simple piece of glass. The permanence of the silica serves as a mirror to our own fleeting existence. We build monuments of marble and steel, hoping to leave a mark on the world, but the desert shows us that even the greatest works of man are temporary. The only things that truly last are those created by the universe itself, the stars, the mountains, and the glass born of their collision. There is a humility to be found in this perspective. It invites us to let go of our desire for control and to simply appreciate the beauty of the moment. The glass does not strive to be anything other than what it is. It does not seek attention or validation. It sits in the sand, catching the light, enduring the wind, and waiting for the next cycle of the dunes to begin. As the last sliver of the sun disappears below the horizon, the desert is plunged into a deep, cool blue. The heat of the day radiates upward into the clear sky, and the stars begin to emerge one by one. These are the same stars that looked down upon the desert on the day the glass was formed. The light we see from them tonight began its journey toward us long ago, much like the glass began its journey from the depths of the earth and the heights of the atmosphere. In the darkness, the fragments of Libyan Desert Glass lose their glow, becoming once again indistinguishable from the shadows. They are tucked away for the night, protected by the vastness of the Sahara, as the world turns and the constellations shift in their slow celestial dance. The story of the glass is not over. It is merely paused. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again, and the light will find the silica once more. A new grain of sand will be moved by the wind, a new facet will be revealed, and the eternal horizon will continue its patient watch over the treasures of the impact. We are but temporary guests in this landscape, brief visitors in a realm that belongs to the wind and the stars. And as we drift towards sleep, we can carry with us the image of that golden glass, a tiny frozen piece of the cosmos resting quietly in the heart of the great singing sands. The journey of this yellow-green glass is a story of transformation, a long and winding path that begins not on our world, but in the cold, dark reaches of the deep heavens, Imagine for a moment a stray traveler of the solar system, a mass of ice and rock drifting through the void for billions of years, silent and ancient. It is a remnant of the very birth of our sun, a witness to the formation of planets, carrying within its core the chemical signature of the early universe. And then, in a sudden violent instant, its long journey ends. It meets our atmosphere not with a whimper, but with a roar that shakes the heavens, a cosmic explosion so powerful that it liquefies the very ground it touches. The silica of the great sand sea is flash-melted at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, turning the mundane grains of the desert into something ethereal, something celestial. It is a moment of pure alchemy, where the fire of the sky creates a substance that should not exist on earth. From that chaotic birth, we follow the glass through the slow passage of millennia. We see it resting under the shifting dunes, hidden from the eyes of the first humans who wandered through a much greener Sahara, a land of lakes and tall grasses that has long since vanished. We see the Neolithic hunters, perhaps the first to recognize the glass for its strange beauty and its sharp, reliable edges, napping it into tools that mirrored the clarity of the water they relied upon. And eventually, we find ourselves in the workshops of the Pharaohs, where a single perfect piece of this starlight was chosen to sit upon the chest of Tutankhamun. To the ancient Egyptians, this was the jewel of the sun god, a piece of the firmament brought down to accompany a boy king into the afterlife. It travelled from the heart of a cosmic furnace to the darkness of a hidden tomb, resting in silence for 3,000 years, while empires rose and fell above the sand. Yet even as we piece together this timeline, the Libyan Desert Glass remains a vessel for secrets that science has yet to fully unlock. We have our theories, our chemical analyses, and our computer models of atmospheric entries, but the glass still holds a certain defiant mystery. There are patches of the desert where the glass is oddly concentrated, and others where it is entirely absent, defying the expected patterns of a typical impact crater. We search for the source crater, a scar in the earth that should match the scale of such a massive melting event, but the desert is vast, and its secrets are buried deep beneath hundreds of feet of shifting sand. Some researchers suggest the crater is simply gone, eroded away by the relentless winds of the Sahara over the course of 29 million years. Others wonder if the explosion happened entirely in the air, a touchdown event where the heat reached the ground, but the solid mass of the Bolide did not, leaving behind a sea of glass, but no hole in the earth. There is a quiet humility in admitting that we do not know everything. In an age where we can map the seafloor and peer into the furthest galaxies, there is something comforting about a mystery that can be held in the palm of one's hand. When you look through a translucent piece of this glass, you are seeing the results of a process we can only imagine. You are seeing the impurities of the desert sand trapped forever in a state of suspended animation. Tiny bubbles of gas that might contain the atmosphere of the Earth as it was nearly 30 million years ago. You are seeing traces of rare Earth elements, exotic isotopes like osmium and iridium that serve as the fingerprints of the star stuff that fell from the sky. Every facet is a page in a book we are still learning how to read. The beauty of the unknown is perhaps the greatest gift the desert gives us. It reminds us that the universe is vast, and our place within it is both small and incredibly special. The glass is a bridge between the infinite and the intimate. It connects the light of a distant star to the jewelry of a king, and the violent energy of a cosmic collision to the peaceful silence of a museum display. It suggests that the history of our world is not just a story of what happened here on the ground, but a story of our constant interaction with the wider cosmos. We are part of a grand celestial architecture, a system where the debris of space can become the treasure of a civilization. As we consider the vastness of this journey, the mind naturally begins to slow, mirroring the patient pace of the desert itself. The Sahara does not hurry. It has seen the coming and going of countless rains, the drying of great rivers, and the slow migration of peoples across its golden expanse. It keeps its secrets with a stoic grace, allowing us to find only what the wind chooses to reveal. There is a profound sense of peace in this realization, the knowledge that some things are meant to remain hidden, protected by the sheer scale of time and space. We do not need all the answers to appreciate the wonder of the glass. The mystery itself is a form of light, illuminating the corners of our imagination and inviting us to dream of what else might be waiting under the dunes. The story of the Saharan glass is a reminder that even the most desolate places are filled with hidden wonders. In the heart of the great sand sea, far from the noise of the modern world, the glass lies in wait, cool to the touch despite the heat of the day. It is a survivor of epochs, a silent witness to the changing face of our planet. And as the years continue to pass, as the earth wobbles on its axis and the stars shift in their constellations, the glass will remain. It is nearly indestructible, a testament to a moment of supreme power that occurred before the first human ever walked the earth. It is a piece of forever, resting in the middle of nowhere. Now let the image of the desert fill your mind, a landscape of infinite curves and soft shadows. The sun has long since vanished, leaving behind a sky so clear and crowded with stars that the Milky Way appears as a bright, glowing river overhead. The air is cool and still. The only sound is the faint, rhythmic sigh of the wind as it brushes against the crest of a dune, a sound like distant breathing. The sand, once burning hot, has released its warmth into the night, and the desert floor is a sea of silver under the light of a full moon. Somewhere, nestled in the hollow of a wind-swept ridge, a fragment of the cosmic glass catches the moonlight. It does not glow with its own light, but it gathers the silver rays, holding them within its translucent depths. It is a tiny, frozen piece of the heavens, resting in the cradle of the sand. It is at home here, in the silence and the cold, far removed from the fires of its birth and the hands of the men who once coveted it. It is back in the realm of the stars, even while it rests upon the earth. The dunes stretch out in every direction, an ocean of stillness that seems to go on forever. There are no borders here, no clocks, no worries of the day. There is only the vast, rhythmic pulse of the planet and the steady, unblinking gaze of the universe. You can feel the weight of the ages pressing down, not as a burden, but as a warm, heavy blanket that anchors you to the earth. The deep time of the Sahara is a lullaby, a song of endurance and quiet beauty that has been playing for millions of years. As you drift further into the embrace of sleep, the image of the golden glass begins to fade, dissolving into the soft velvet darkness of the desert night. The mysteries of the impact, the secrets of the pharaohs, and the questions of the scientists all slip away, leaving only a sense of profound calm. You are a part of this landscape now, a witness to the peace that follows the storm. The universe is vast, and you are safe within its reach. The stars continue their slow, silent dance across the sky, watching over the sands and the treasures they hold. Everything is as it should be. The journey is complete. The glass is at rest, and you too are ready to rest, drifting down into the deep, quiet sands of sleep.